Good evening, and welcome to tonight's presentation of the Crawford Gateway Revitalization Strategy. I'm Dr. L. Pettis-Patton, City Manager of the City of Portsmouth. On February the 2nd, 2018, during the City Council's retreat, the Crawford Gateway Revitalization Strategy was presented. As a result of this presentation, City Council directed the City Manager to present the revitalization strategy to you, the members of the public. Tonight, Mr. Bob Baldwin, Planning Director, Mr. Robert Moore, Economic Development Director, and Mr. James Wright, the City Engineer, will present the strategy. The visioning and strategies encompassing this presentation have been evolving with some implementations for over more than 2 decades. We're moving further to the revitalization and realization that the components of this strategy are all possible. We're pleased to share this exciting revitalization strategy with you tonight. Mr. Bob Baldwin will begin the presentation, followed by Mr. Robert Moore and Mr. James Wright. Mr. Baldwin.
Good evening, or good afternoon, or whatever, wherever we are at the moment. Certainly pleased to begin the presentation tonight. And as Dr. Patton indicated, the city has been at this revitalization effort for downtown for a long time, a lot of plans. And I think while a number of people are pretty well acquainted with it, there are a lot of people that really don't know the story of what the city has been doing over these years. So I'm going to take a few minutes and kind of walk through what we would consider the more contemporary planning projects for the downtown area and talk a little bit about where we are and where we think we are going to be going in the future. So we're going to start off, and I think, again, for some people this might be a little bit of a refresher, but we're going to go back to 1994. That was when Urban Design Associates with Ray Gendros came to town and was part of the city's Vision 2005 process. So for those people aware of that, that process initiated in the city's Department of Economic Development and then was elevated to the city manager's office. And it pretty much stayed in effect up until about the year 2000 when Urban Design Associates did their waterfront design plan. Anybody down on the 4th floor, if you walk down the hallway of planning, there's a framed copy of that charrette plan hanging on the wall if you want to look at it. That plan was really part of an economic development strategy the city had started at the time, trying to attract more people to the city. That was really a goal. A lot of the Vision 2005 plan was trying to find ways to attract more people to Portsmouth. And so there were a number of projects that came about during that time frame. I think you're all pretty familiar with them. The Renaissance Hotel was a Vision 2005 project. The Ocean Marine Yacht Center was a Vision 2005 project, as is the pavilion next door, the new Union Bank and Trust Pavilion, at the time known as the Intellis Pavilion. All of those projects were really the main development projects downtown that occurred during that Vision 2005 process. And as many of you may also know, right around that same time, the city shifted a lot of its attention to the Frederick Boulevard corridor with Walmart, and later the Kroger store. It also shifted out towards Victory Boulevard with the replacement of the Tower Mall with Victory Crossing Shopping Center. So a lot of the activity downtown kind of went into a little bit of a planning lull until 2003. In 2003, the Urban Land Institute came to town, and they had an advisory panel, came to town, a lot of public involvement, and they put together a strategy out of that. And that sort of got the city back into the mode of downtown planning. The real interesting thing that came out of that project that is carried forward to this day is that's the first plan where they really started telling the city to focus on residential development downtown, that if you really wanted to have a strong downtown, have a strong retail presence downtown, you needed more residents downtown. And so you should start focusing in many ways on residential, and that will help stabilize and enhance both your office and retail sectors. And so that was that 2003 plan. And then we're going to hit to the plan that we're going to focus on a little bit here tonight. It's the 2006 Urban Design Associates came back into town, did the Downtown-Waterfront Strategic Plan, And there's a visual of it, at least part of it on the screen to your left. That process, again, Urban Design Associates was in town for about a week, had a lot of public involvement, a lot of interaction with the city staff and developers, and in that process started the city again thinking forward about what to do with the downtown development. A couple of major components came out of that process. Number one was again, more focus on residential development downtown. Number two was really the recognition of the value of the waterfront. There was a real push at the time. You can see in the visual there what Mr. Gendros referred to as the skinny towers at the time. But really that was an expression of, this is your valuable property downtown. This is where you really should focus on getting high-end development. And so along that plan, if you look at the 2006 Urban Design Associates plan, you'll see locations where these skinny towers. The other thing that is obvious to anybody looking at this plan, you'll see that the current City Hall building is not in that shot right there. That is a residential building in the waterfront where City Hall currently sits. And as is the courthouse building and the jail next door. Up until 2006, while there have been discussions about getting rid of the city's presence down along the waterfront, this is the first plan that basically said, we're going to show that. This is your future, where you should be going. And so those municipal buildings are shown off the waterfront. And then I think there are a couple of things you'll see that actually happened during that time. You'll see the roundabout, which is out in front of the building here today. You see that was first depicted in this plan right there. And right next to that, you'll see a building that actually looks almost exactly like the Harbor Vista Apartments lined up on that roundabout. And so there's, in fact, the design of a project that came in directly as a result of this 2006 planning effort. And so one last thing I'll mention, this is also a plan that started segmenting downtown, reestablishing the city's historic block pattern, extending Middle Street back through from basically where the parking garage, the County Street parking garage is, back over towards BART and Pavilion Drive, also extending County Street back down to Water Street, basically through where the courthouse building lies today. So those are all important planning elements. And one other big thing came out of that I think you may not be aware of. This is the genesis. This is the first public recognition of the poor condition of the city's infrastructure downtown. There was a clear identification that you didn't have enough. Primarily at the time, it was water, the age and the condition of the water resources downtown could not support any kind of development of this kind of magnitude. And so right behind that, and go to the next thing on the slide, the 2006 Downtown Master Utility Plan, and that rolled right out of this Urban Design Associates project, where the Utilities Department then brought in URS to prepare the Master Utilities Plan. And as I think you're aware, that project is being constructed and is still under construction today. But in all of this area where the development is being shown, all of those utilities have been upgraded since that 2006 plan. So we're really moving along where the city's ongoing investment is starting to take you to a point where the ability to redevelop is now being physically supported by the infrastructure you need to do that. So that was the 2006 plan. I just wrapped this up with a couple of other plans. 2009, when the city was redoing its zoning ordinance at the time, they actually updated the Downtown Master Plan and Waterfront Strategy with a firm called HOK. And that basically took the 2006 plan, a little bit more granularity to it, a little bit more detail to it, built the zoning off of it, but it was basically taking that vision plan and making it a little bit more of a zoning concept, how you would go about creating zoning to allow the kind of densities and land use mixes that were shown in that 2006 plan. And then the last thing I want to mention, since I think most of you are probably aware that we're updating the city's comprehensive plan. Before we started doing the Build One Portsmouth comprehensive plan project, we brought in Weldon Cooper, Center for Public Service. They're affiliated with the University of Virginia, and they did a demographic analysis looking at our population growth. And as a side benefit of that, or additional element in that study, they started pointing out once again the high value of our downtown, the uniqueness of the place, the attractiveness to millennials and to empty nesters, and once again saying, if you're really trying to reverse the trend of your population declines that you've been having over years, you really need to get back into this residential development mode. So on and on and on, we have people telling us you really need to be focusing on residential development downtown. So that's really where we were at 2015 when we started the comprehensive plan. A couple other things we'll mention. I'll go back to 2009 when the HOK plan was done. The city also did a market analysis for downtown Bay Area economics, did a market analysis. And as the plans were describing, the market analyses that were being done were showing the number one most in-demand land use for downtown is residential. And it was almost, if you looked at their study, we were so far below our fair share in the market and the market demand for the area that they once again said you need to keep building your downtown, take advantage of your uniqueness of your place, and focus on residential. You'll get some side benefits of some office, but you'll really strengthen your retail downtown if you get more full-time residents downtown. 2016 and 17, Hunden Strategic Partners came in. We wanted to do an analysis post-recession. We all know that the region's been a little bit slow recovering from the 2008 era recession, and so we wanted to once again verify as we started doing more planning in our comp plan, whatever, what the market was for downtown. And once again, we get the same statement coming back. You're not getting your fair share of residential development. This is the biggest opportunity you have in your downtown is residential. So again, basically for the last 15 plus years, we have this continual story being told to us, either in our planning or in our market analysis, that you really need to be focusing more on downtown residential development. And so I just think that's kind of interesting as we've been moving through this process. Last thing I'll do, I want to summarize. There's been sort of these consistent themes that have run through all these plans, and try to pull those out to say, what are the kind of things we should be focusing on as a city when we have a strategy for redeveloping downtown. And I just kind of walk through those really quickly. Number one, there's this constant refrain about enhancing connectivity along Crawford Street and the waterfront. This started back with the 2005 vision exercise. Again, if you look at the Ray Gendro's map from that area, there's a lot of discussion about connecting the waterfront, that we have isolated pockets of development, but we're not very well interconnected, and that's really not allowing the city to take full advantage of its water. Really what I'd have to say is our best asset, is our waterfront. Second thing is I said you should do what you can to enhance the value of development opportunities and redevelopment sites. So again, this is trying to make certain investments, whether it be through streetscaping, landscaping, parks, what have you, to enhance the value, make the properties look better and be a better value for developers you're trying to entice into the market or who already are in the market for doing redevelopment. Third thing, I think we're all familiar with the improving stormwater management, flood protection. That kind of goes without saying. I think we're all familiar with issues we have in regard to flooding and recent storms. That's been just sort of repeated here on the waterfront. You need to be taking that into consideration with whatever you're doing with your infrastructure and development downtown. And then again, as I mentioned, really need to push the increased downtown daytime population and improve livability. And again, this is, if you're trying to attract people to live downtown, it needs to be a great place to live. You need to attract them there. You need to make it bike and pedestrian friendly. You need to have quality open space. And then you need to expand your retail, shopping, and dining options. Of course, all of that being driven by having more activity, more people downtown. Again, a lot of discussion about the quality of place, the unique character of the city of Portsmouth, especially its downtown. So I said you ought to focus on that. That's what, quite frankly, a lot of the studies of the millennials, if you want to put them in that category, what they're looking for experience. So you've got a real thing. You're not trying to build something new. You need to really enhance what you have. You want to focus on value and opportunities for a more connected seawall and more open space amenities. So you have a lot of that. Once again, it's not just about, if you look at these plans, not just about putting buildings on places. You're trying to build a place. You're trying to make sure this is an environment where people are attracted, where people want to live, they want to work, they want to stay down here. So that's really important. And I think if you we talk a little bit more about city investment, you'll see a lot of that in play. And then the last thing is kind of leading us into where we're going tonight. I want to minimize your public use and the tax-exempt footprint so you can expand private sector opportunities. Again, this goes back to really that 2006 plan where we started talking about moving the city hall or moving the courts building, saying, you've got too large of a tax-exempt footprint downtown, and you really need to be thinking about, if this is your most valuable property, if this is where your redevelopment interest is going to be, you need to get the city off of those properties and into a more appropriate location for civic uses, and then allowing the private sector to come in and maximize the value of your waterfront or other high-value downtown sites. And so that's kind of, in a nutshell, kind of a quick run through of the city's planning history. And you could go back before this. The city's obviously been doing a lot of this since the 60s and 70s when the City Hall was built in 1980, or late 70s when the Courts Complex was built, removing a lot of the old bar and tavern uses that were downtown, a lot of the rail, waterfront wharf type uses. So this is an evolutionary process. I always tell people, look at where you are today and where you're going and not be too focused on what you think ought to happen, because this is an evolving process for building your downtown. You don't do all this in one day. You can't flood the market with too many things at one time. So you really have to look at this as building that value of your downtown to continue to make it even more special than people think it is when they come over. And of course, going back to that Vision 2005 process, that whole idea of trying to attract people over, and that was really where we started in our planning process. How do we get people around the region and outside of the region to come over? And so that's kind of where we have been in a nutshell. Where we are today, we're still using that 2006 concept plan, and it's still the baseline for downtown redevelopment. Obviously, we'll be refining specifics as we go, but we still work off that vision. That's sort of the concept of where we ought to go. And I'll just make one other comment. If you go back and look at the waterfront sites that were evaluated by UDA when they're here doing that process, we spend a lot of time talking about the Holiday Inn site, or the Crawford Bay site, as we refer to it today. But in the UDA plan, there were only 2 development sites even located on that northern end of the waterfront. And that would be the Crawford Bay site and the parking lot of the Federal Building, what was referred to as the GSA site. 8 of the 10 sites they highlighted are all down on this end. They're all down on the southern end of the waterfront. They're all in this area now. This is your focal point. And every plan we've done has recognized that your true redevelopment opportunities are along the waterfront, but really you got to have a big focus down here in this southern end. So again, we mentioned this before. Again, you can see from the project, you can see these skinny towers located along the waterfront. Again, this is really just to identify to the city a couple of things, but the primary one is that water is your calling card to high-end development. And so you should maximize the use here, make sure you take very good care in getting good projects built along the waterfront. And again, you can just see sort of the massing and the redevelopment of these blocks that would be around where the roundabout is and further back away from that. So the study is available on the planning department's webpage. If anyone wants to go and read the study, we still have that posted. If you want to go and read the entire UDA plan, there's a series of UDA plans, but this is the one we're focusing on for our downtown waterfront that we call Crawford Gateway, and that'll be my last comment about it. One of the comments that Ray Gendro's made repeatedly when he's been in town was, it's confusing to people, or it was at the time they would come into downtown, going through all the interchanges off of 264, trying to get in downtown. And they said, you really ought to focus on your gateways. How do you welcome people into your downtown? And that was really the genesis of the roundabout. Really trying to create a place where people would recognize I've made it into downtown. I know this is a special place. And so we continue with that concept as we move forward with the Crawford Gateway Corridor, the idea that we need to continue to enhance the gateways, to continue to make, whether it be Crawford Street or the seawall, any of these streets, they really need to be made very attractive and enticing, welcoming places for people to come to, and not lose, as I always tell people, devil's in the details. You need to make sure you're paying attention to all of those things as you go forward with your redevelopment. And so with that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Mr. Moore.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Robert Moore. I'm the Director of Economic Development here in the city of Portsmouth. Thank you, Bob, for that kind of history of where we are. I'm going to go back and bring up the map, the kind of 2006 study that Bob has been talking about. But I want to take a moment to kind of focus on this private investment downtown. From an economic development standpoint, this map represents, those 9 numbers there represent the private investment, more specifically the multifamily development, residential development that we have done over the last 3 to 5 years here in the city of Portsmouth, primarily downtown. You can kind of see a little bit, but this yellow here, this yellow shading also represents the property that is held by the city. And whether that's the city itself, whether that's the EDA or the Economic Development Authority, or Portsmouth Redevelopment and Housing, or PRHA. What this shows, if you look at in comparison to the 2006 study, we have done a number of the things, whether on purpose or by accident, we have done what those plans have asked us to do. At this point, in order for us to continue moving forward, we have to look at the investment that we have made from a private standpoint and also from a public standpoint. We're looking at here a number of projects that have either been completed or under construction or under design. So you're looking at $100 million of investment from a private sector, $101 million from the public sector, all of those things adding up to be, again, an area showcasing downtown. We've made investment, the private sector has made an investment, but in order for us to continue that momentum, in order for us to continue to redevelop downtown, I mean, it's really simple. And council has seen the vision, as we have seen, but we need to get out of our own way. We need to move and relocate and shrink that footprint that is the city of Portsmouth on the waterfront. And moving forward, this plan, as we go forward with this Crawford redevelopment or revitalization plan, we are doing just that. So now I'll turn it over to James Wright.
Good evening. The impetus for this plan or strategy was actually as we started to look at the design for the replacement of the County Street garage. During those initial design meetings for this garage replacement, it became clear that the garage was too large for the proposed land uses. The initial sizings for the garage concepts occurred prior to the court's move and several other businesses moving away from this downtown corridor. So what the design team did is we took a step back and we decided to recreate the parking model. And in recreating that parking model, what we did is we looked at those land uses that immediately affected the garage, and we started to see that those land uses that were originally part of that concept were no longer applicable. And then when we looked into the study, then we came to see that, hold on, there's the map. We came to see that there's a large municipal presence downtown. And I'm going to ask Mr. Baldwin to come up to discuss some of the things that went into the analysis as we looked to right-size the garage.
Okay, so we'll go a little bit of planning detail. So as Mr. Wright indicated, he asked the planning department if we would assist in helping to right-size the new parking garage. So we did, based on what I described before. We took a lot of the plans we had, we looked at the condition of the property around the garage, within what we consider to be a reasonable range for someone to walk away from their car back to the car, try to figure out what development might have around it, look at our parking requirements. And for those of you who don't know, the trick in all this is the city's current zoning, since 2010, does not require any parking from any development downtown. So you have to take a look at how the market's been dealing with that and determine what level of parking that the public sector ought to provide in its parking garages. And what we discovered, of course, is that in every one of those projects that Mr. Moore was talking about, the private sector developments, all of them were providing at least one parking space per unit for residential projects. So we go into this analysis looking at a baseline, assuming that that's sort of the market requirement that they're going to be providing on-site parking. We started to look at the development opportunities downtown, and I think this picture tells you immediately what the problem was we started getting into, and that is in all of those blocks where you see in that yellow color, or greenish yellow, whatever you want to call that, that's the city. And those properties, unless the city moves off of them, aren't available to anyone to develop. So as you begin to move away, start on the waterfront, as you start to move back towards Court Street, you can see block after block, there's city footprint. The other thing you see in there, if you can see, there are little blue dots on there. I think the people in the police department will recognize that's where they're located, all over downtown. We have a very large presence of the police, and unfortunately for them, they're scattered in all of these different locations downtown. So not only is the city out there, it's important public facilities are located out there. And the fire department headquarters is also located in Bristol Square. So if you look at Bristol Square, you know, the EOC is on one end, you got the fire department administration on the other. So we started having a little tricky time trying to calculate, well, how big is this parking garage going to be if we can't assume or make some assumptions about redevelopment, because if the city doesn't move, you really don't have much redevelopment opportunity down here. It's basically taken up by city projects. So that's where we were. So we made some basic assumptions going into this process. What would be reasonable, assuming, and this was a big assumption, but assuming that you could move the police and fire off of these sites into some other location, and then we took a look at it from that perspective. So that's when we really started getting into this conversation about what to do about downtown, because clearly this, if you go back to all these, more than 2 decades of planning, this has become, the big roadblock to moving forward, the fact that the city is holding so many properties. On the positive side, of course, the city controls a lot of property, so you have the ability to use those properties for redevelopment if you can get yourself out of the way. So that really is sort of the background. Just want to go through that. That map kind of gives you a pretty good idea when you drive around where the city's located downtown. And it's a pretty sizable footprint considering the small amount of developable property we have along the waterfront.
So last fiscal year and the current fiscal year, various members of staff have undertaken the task to look at municipal facilities and do assessments. City Hall and 801 Water Street require substantial funds to repair and place their major building systems. These 2 buildings are nearing the end of their service life because of the way they were constructed. As displayed in the previous map that you see there to the left, they occupy high-value redevelopment sites that will present a developer with prime waterfront views that are not readily available anywhere else in Hampton Roads. There is an opportunity to plan for the relocation of municipal functions from the waterfront, resulting in a more practical expenditure of funds that align with the long-stated downtown development strategies. The map showing the municipal presence downtown indicates that public safety, as Mr. Baldwin said, occupies several parcels that have significant redevelopment potential. Planning to relocate public safety personnel is another trigger to start planning for the relocation of the municipal presence from the waterfront. A public safety complex is one of the most important decisions in facilitating the redevelopment of downtown. I'm going to ask Mr. Moore to come up and speak a little bit to what that block could potentially look like.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. What this is showing here is essentially the County Street garage here. If we take that garage and redevelop that site and essentially shrink the footprint of the actual garage, but raise the garage, so increase the height, add some additional parking, that frees up a potential site for office or retail. Certainly, we could then take what would be Middle Street and expand it through, and then we could actually bring Middle Street all the way through what would be Bristol Square, all the way down to now set up essentially 3 additional quadrants for redevelopment. We see this as a key opportunity downtown and something that is certainly feasible with the plan that we have in place going forward.
So moving forward, there are a number of projects that are already that we can accomplish with existing CIP funds that would help us progress this strategy along. A stormwater park would serve as an amenity by providing a destination to those residents in the immediate area. It would also provide a link to the waterfront and make the adjacent parcels more marketable by providing stormwater nutrient credits for redevelopment. The site selection and preliminary engineering would continue to advance the work on the public safety complex, which is a vital component of the downtown revitalization strategy. Wherever City Hall gets relocated, we need to know what the space looks like and who's going to be in that facility. As a key gateway, it is important to know what Crawford from the roundabout to Effingham Street will look like. A corridor study will examine such components as lane width, pedestrian and bicycle access, the use of public spaces, and other amenities. This is also vital from a planning perspective, as is necessary for the downtown D1 zoning revisions and also for determining connectivity to the waterfront. And the next parcel, I'll ask Mr. Moore to come back up once again that this is an example of what the waterfront could potentially look like.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Certainly, from an economic development standpoint, we get excited when we see things like this. To be able to redevelop what would be the well-known parking lot right outside of City Hall, to turn that into what we stated as a kind of a stormwater park, a stormwater feature. That would allow us to then bring County Street through. If we replace the garage, the jail building, we could bring County Street through to connect to this feature and then create 2 additional parcels for mixed-use development. Again, something that we see as very feasible from an economic development standpoint. Certainly also looking at the opportunity to relocate eventually City Hall, and then putting potentially anything from a residential tower to some type of office tower, things of that nature.
So with the next steps, as mentioned before, City Council at the retreat has given us the go-ahead to move forward with those 5 projects on the previous slide. So staff will continue to move forward with those projects. The city team will work to develop a sequencing strategy for potential redevelopment activities. We'll also work on a plan for potential financing options and opportunities, including leveraging private investment. The Crawford Gateway Revitalization Strategy seeks to capitalize on substantial public and private investment by placing an emphasis on the City Council vision to provide access to the waterfront and reinvigorate the downtown with substantial economic development. Dr. Patton?
Tonight, we have had our planning director, our economic development director, and our city engineer to present the components of the Crawford Gateway Revitalization Strategy. As Mr. Wright shared on frame 13, if you could go to frame 13. Can you go back? It's not going back. Where is Mr.? On slide 13, Mr. Wright shared with you the components of the strategy that we are moving forward with that are already approved in terms, right here, in terms of our current CIP, the total of $475,000. What we, the strategy team did was look at where they had planned to date and looked within our CIP with the components of what we needed to move forward in these pieces of the strategy were already there to move forward. So we are very, very excited to have the opportunity to begin the conceptual for the development of the stormwater park, to begin the process of site selection and preliminary engineering for a public safety complex. Our public safety right now encompasses about 9 facilities in downtown Portsmouth, and the space needs assessments for future City Hall, which initial program is $75,000. The Crawford Street Parkway Corridor Study, and we are currently revitalizing our complete zoning that we are worked on now for almost a year as a result of the City Council's Big 4 Things in 2017 addressing that, so we're moving forward there. And then the study assessment of the Civic Center, which is the jail site, and for the total of $475,000. With that said, if there are any questions as it pertains to our presentation we have made this evening, we would be happy to answer those questions. Yes, sir.
Hi, I have one. First off, this is very encouraging.
Thank you.
It's very encouraging and exciting for us. Can you describe the stormwater park and what's involved in it, what its purpose is, how it will be used? Because it looks like it's just taking up a big footprint.
Yes, and tell them about how all of it. Yes.
So in today's current landscape with stormwater management, whether it's a managed lawn, concrete, or what have you, you have to provide some sort of nutrient credit reduction when you go to redevelop a site. So with these parcels adjacent to the parking lot, a stormwater park will provide an opportunity to actually provide treatment that they might not necessarily have to do for their parcels, so it makes those parcels more marketable. It also provides an attraction to all those residences living downtown. You can't have a bunch of people living downtown with no place to go. So they could come walk their dog, have a picnic, or whatever. It links to the seawall, and it also links to Legend and some of the other businesses downtown.
Tell them it's federal and state required.
Yeah, so another part of the stormwater is that it meets our local, state, and federal requirements.
Yes. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Jail site study, is that a feasibility study to find a new site or is the new site already chosen?
There's no sites chosen.
No, the initial study is a high-level look, looking at what those potential options going to that site are, what our costs are to continue to maintain it as is, and sure to give us a baseline moving forward as we look to move that facility off of the waterfront.
And your question, Mr. Carroll, of have we selected a site? No, we're not there. We're just here with these pieces that we're working on. Yes, sir.
One more question.
Okay.
Right. Cost of any of this will impact the replacement of the Churchill Bridge. Is the money already there for the replacement of the bridge?
No, the money for the bridge has been there for 18 months or so no impact to the bridge funding at all.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
I didn't hear anything about grocery stores, and we have all of these people that we want to move to this area, and there's nowhere to shop. You know, I missed a meeting, and I understood that there was, I guess it was hearsay, going to be discussion about a grocery store further east, further west, downtown. Did that come to fruition, or can you light me on that?
I will be happy to have Mr. Robert. Oh, the question was, she didn't hear anything about a grocery store. We are having more people to come into our downtown area, and so I'm going to ask Mr. Moore to speak to that.
All right. That's a great question. Certainly, we are working on, for downtown, several amenities, including the grocery store. That's a necessity, actually, not an amenity. This plan that we're talking about right here tonight is really a high-level view of what we can do to bring and attract more people downtown. Certainly, those necessities, such as a grocery store, things to do, such as that comes along with the plan. But again, this is just from a high-level view. The details of how, what, when, and why, we're still working those out. Yes, ma'am.
Wouldn't the grocery store be part of the infrastructure, so to speak?
Well, let me just say this. We are, and continue to, are in contact with several grocers about downtown. Certainly, again, we see that as a need. And all I can do is leave it at that. Okay.
I just wanted you to know, that is a high priority, and in economic development, there's work that they have to do. We can't say who they're talking to and whatever, but it is a priority. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
My age, what is the time frame?
Well, sir, I think I would include myself in your time, with your age. As Mr. Baldwin indicated, and as our plans and the evolution of what we're doing, this city has been working to get to this night to present this revitalization strategy since the 1990s, with work ongoing year after year after year. And one of the things that I thought was so eye-opening, in 2006, and when what was the one, Crawford Revitalization, when we started talking about the roundabout, and those of you who were here, we couldn't even imagine putting a roundabout down there, and I can remember just trying to figure out how we're going to do it, and she's shaking her head, how we're going to get there, but we got the roundabout. But what really opened my eyes was, in 2006, when that plan was drawn up, Des Inc. was across the street. When I came to town, Wavy was over there, and I'm pointing because that's where it was, and there were other buildings. And now, in the exact spot from that vision, you have the Harbor Vista, and it's positioned identical to what was in the vision back in the 2006 timeframe. So this will evolve over years. For this to completely all be realized will be over the next, what, 20 years, 15, 20 years?
Probably not that.
The next 10 to 15 years. I said 20, but the guys said, no, Doc, not that long. But it will be over the next 10, I'm going to say 10 to 15 years. So it is a vision. We're moving forward. We're excited. We have our mayor here tonight. Mayor, would you like to come up and say a few words? And we have our vice mayor who have joined us. And we will be, this is already online, and we will be presenting, as I said last night, the results of the City Council's 2018 retreat results, which we will get, or summary, which we will receive in the next 2 weeks from the facilitators to share with the public. Mayor Rowe.
Thank you, Dr. Patton. But first, thank you for coming out tonight and seeing this great vision. And thank you to our city manager and her team. Let's give them a hand. We were briefed on this back at our retreat, which was 2 weekends ago. And I think Bob Baldwin said that if you put all the downtown plans on one shelf, it would cover about 6 feet or so, stacked vertically, horizontally, that is, with the plans being vertical. At that retreat, I thank my colleagues for pulling the trigger to get government off the waterfront. And that's really, really important. And the question that was asked about the Civic Center parking lot here, think about the reflecting pool in Washington, D.C., and what a great feature that is. And then think about going along Waterside Drive in Norfolk as you make that turn to go north on Bush Street. What you have there is Tow Point Park. You don't have a building, and so you get that vista of the water. And it's a great view because you're looking at the city of Portsmouth at that point. And so council's very excited about this. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. Questions like the jail. We've got to decide, do we stay with this facility at the regional jail? Does it get built at the regional jail as a city project or a regional project? Does it go someplace else? These are decisions that we'll have to grapple with because that jail will be around for the next half a century, just like this one has been. So I'd like to recognize Vice Mayor Elizabeth Simmons, and would you like to say anything? Yeah. Do you have any questions for council or any comments? And I hope you're excited too.
Are you excited? They're saying yes.
Yeah. And just to tell you how hot our downtown is, first, the Breeden Company told us that in December, they were 100% occupied next door. And so people want to live downtown. I take you back to last summer, the Seawall Art Show, and I was asked by the organizers to make the comments for the awards of the juried show for young children and teenagers. And so we made I made the comments, the awards were given out, and then we walked over to the sidewalk in front of the Sports Hall of Fame where the artwork was displayed, and I'm standing next to this couple, and they're about my age, and come to find out that the husband was a retired judge in Hampton. And the wife said, "We just love coming over here and visiting our grandchildren. We love your downtown. You have great restaurants, and it's so wonderful." And I'm thinking, that's pretty cool, because downtown Hampton is pretty cool too. But here, and to finish up what she says, "I wish Hampton's downtown was like yours." So I thought that was a great validation. So thank you again for coming out tonight, and I'll turn it back over to Dr. Patton.
Stay right here, Mayor. I would be remiss, and in my spirit, I apologize to myself, if we did not take a moment in silence for the loss of lives of the 17 students who were killed. And I have not shared this with anyone, but before coming back to Portsmouth, I worked in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, Palm Beach, the Caribbean, and all the way up through the Carolinas. Parkland High School was one of my high schools. So I'm very familiar with the terrain. And when I shared with someone yesterday that it's about 4,000 students, and they announced last night it's right at about 3,700. But my largest school in Florida was Weston, and there were 6,800 students in that one high school. So if we would all just take a moment in silence, remembering the families, those who have lost their lives, and let's just continue to pray for peace within our nation. Thank you so much for coming out this evening, and we are always available here in this city if you have any questions to reach out to us. Have a great and safe night. Thank you. Thanks, Mayor.